Draft notices arrived in plain envelopes. No warning, no preamble. A man would open the letter, glance once, and everything changed. Neighbors shook his hand, mothers swallowed tears, and the whole town seemed to hold its breath. Today, we'd see it on the news. Back then, it was personal. A letter carried by the same postman who knew your family by name. Women filled the factories, welding, riveting, assembling shells, proving they could do the work just as well as men. Yet when the war ended, many were told to go back home. "Your husband needs the job now," they heard. It sounds unfair today, but most didn't complain. They'd done their duty to the war, to the country, and to the home waiting for them. Factories ran around the clock, echoing with clangs and sparks as workers tried to meet impossible quotas. Hearing protection was rare, and accidents were common. Men lost fingers, women caught hair in machines, and no one talked about workplace wellness. Safety signs existed, but production mattered more. Today, that'd make headlines. Back then, it was another day's work in the arsenal of democracy. Saving bacon grease wasn't just thrifty, it was patriotic. Housewives poured every drop of cooled fat into tin cans and set them aside for collection drives. The fat was used to make glycerin for bombs and ammunition. Imagine explaining that today. Your kitchen scraps fueling the war. Folks back then took pride in it. Even waste had a purpose when the whole country pulled together. On the coasts, people practiced nighttime dimouts. Street lights were covered, porch bulbs painted blue, and cars drove with their headlights barely glowing. It was eerie. Whole neighborhoods wrapped in darkness for fear of enemy planes. Today, we'd see that as panic, but back then, it was unity. Folks sat by candlelight, listening to the radio hum, feeling connected through the quiet. In the 1940s, everyone carried ration books, little paper lifelines tucked beside family photos and grocery lists. Sugar, gas, and shoes were limited, so folks learned to stretch every bit. Coupons meant meals, so you guarded them like money. People didn't whine about it either. They understood sacrifice. Today, we'd flood social media with complaints. But back then, it was just part of doing your share. Boys not yet 17 sometimes lied about their age, eager to fight. They'd stand tall at the recruiting office, hoping no one noticed. Neighbors knew. Parents sometimes pretended not to. You'd see them march off in oversized uniforms, proud as men. Today, we'd call it tragedy. Back then, it was courage, a whole generation in a hurry to grow up. At night, volunteer air raid wardens patrolled blocks with flashlights, making sure curtains were drawn tight. A sliver of light could bring a sharp knock on the door. It was equal part safety and superstition. People took it seriously. They believed vigilance kept everyone safe. Today, we'd call it paranoia, but then it was civic duty, done with a whistle and a sense of purpose. Men didn't step outside without a hat. Fedoras, flat caps, even ties on weekends. Respectability was part of being seen. You might spot a fellow mowing the lawn in slacks and a tucked shirt, hat brim tilted just so. It wasn't vanity. It was habit. Today, we value comfort over formality. But back then, looking put together was how you showed pride in yourself. Radio announcers read sponsor ads for Miracle-Tonics and hair restorers with straight faces. Guaranteed to calm the nerves, they'd promise, their voices warm and confident. Nobody questioned it. The ad sounded as real as the news. These days, there'd be disclaimers and lawsuits. But in those times, people trusted what came through the speaker. A soothing voice carried more weight than fine print ever could. Hospital wards smelled of disinfectant and tobacco. Nurses would light cigarettes for wounded soldiers sitting by their beds like friends, not caretakers. No one thought it strange. It was comfort, a piece of normal life amid the pain. You couldn't do that now, of course. But in those dim rooms, with big band music playing faintly on the radio, it probably felt like a small kindness. Train platforms were crowded with families saying goodbye. No metal detectors, no checkpoints, just hugs, handkerchiefs, and the shrill call of the conductor. Soldiers leaned from windows to wave as the train pulled away. It was heartbreak in motion. Today, we'd capture it on phones, but back then, it lived only in memory, the sight of a uniform disappearing down the tracks. Many soldiers mailed home helmets, flags, or even sidearms from overseas, little trophies of their journey. Officially, firearms weren't supposed to leave the front, but rules bent under the weight of nostalgia. Those souvenirs ended up in attics and trunks, quiet reminders of the war's reach. Today, customs would seize them in an instant. Back then, it was how men brought a piece of history home. Cigarette ads were everywhere, smiling soldiers, confident doctors, even Santa Claus puffing away. Brands claimed to steady nerves or open up your wind. It sounds absurd now, but smoking was considered clean, even modern. Every ashtray gleamed like a sign of success. The air might have been thick with smoke, but so was the pride, the feeling that America was tough, busy, and unbothered. Public pools were simpler then. Concrete bottoms, high diving boards, and a lot less supervision. Most had chlorination, but safety rules were loose. Kids learned to swim by being thrown in one way or another. No floaties, no lifeguard lectures, just cold water and shouts from the deep end. It sounds reckless now, but that's how confidence, and the occasional nosebleed, was built. School air raid drills were part of the routine. Sirens wailed, desks scraped, and kids huddled in hallways with arms over their heads. Teachers spoke softly about just being prepared. It wasn't fear so much as normalcy, like fire drills today. The children didn't grasp the danger. To them, it was a moment of excitement in the middle of spelling practice. Movie theaters didn't pause mid-film. They built the war right into the show. Between double features, reels rolled of troops, battles, and home front heroes. People clapped for victory updates, cried over losses, then settled back for a musical. It was strange, maybe, mixing war and entertainment, but it kept spirits high, and in a way, everyone felt part of the same story. The traveling salesman was a familiar face, suit pressed, hat tipped, suitcase full of brushes, books, or kitchen gadgets. He'd knock unannounced, and most folks invited him in for coffee. Deals were struck with smiles and handshakes. It was business built on trust. Today, we'd call it unsafe or old-fashioned. But back then, a stranger with good manners could always find a welcome. Many neighbors shared a single party line telephone. You'd pick up to make a call and hear Mrs. Henderson chatting with her sister 3 houses down. Some listened in. Most pretended not to. Privacy wasn't the point. Community was. If an emergency struck, you just hollered into the line, and someone, somewhere, always answered. Now, we'd call that nosy. Back then, it was connection. Tissues weren't a household staple yet. Everyone carried a folded handkerchief. You used it, washed it, ironed it, and used it again. It sounds unsanitary today, but it was normal, even elegant. A gentleman might offer his to a lady in tears. It wasn't wasteful. It was polite. In a world of disposables now, there's something to be said for that kind of care. Coal furnaces were the heart of the house. Before breakfast, someone, usually the father or an older child, shoveled fresh coal into the roaring belly downstairs. The air smelled faintly of soot, and the warmth felt earned. It was messy work, but it was home. Today, we tap a thermostat. Back then, you fed the fire by hand and watched it glow like pride itself. Counters sold cigarettes, candy, and razor blades side by side, and the clerk barely looked up. Age limits existed on paper, but small-town stores didn't check IDS. A boy could run an errand for Dad and walk out with a pack of Camels. No one saw it as scandalous, just trust in a simpler form. Now it'd mean lawsuits. Then it meant growing up. Teachers were strict, and their word was final. A wooden ruler across the knuckles wasn't unusual, and no parent demanded an apology. Discipline was seen as character building. Kids feared teachers in the same way they respected them. Today, there'd be headlines and lawsuits, but back then, it was normal. You learned fast, mostly not to talk while the teacher was talking. Dogs roamed towns like furry neighbors. They followed kids to school, waited outside stores, and wandered home by dinner. Nobody feared them or fenced them in. They were part of the landscape, as familiar as mailmen and milk trucks. Today, that'd spark animal control calls. But in those days, a dog with a collar and a good sense of direction belonged everywhere. Every morning, the milkman made his rounds, placing glass bottles capped with foil or cardboard on the porch. By sunrise, you'd hear the clink of glass and the rattle of his cart. It was simple and personal. Fresh milk delivered to your door. Today, we'd marvel at the inefficiency, but back then it felt civilized, the kind of small luxury ordinary people could count on. Kids helped too, hauling scrap metal, rubber, and tin cans to school collection drives. They called it junk for victory. Old toys, broken bikes, even pots and pans went into the pile. Teachers weighed it, and the winning class got a flag for the wall. Nobody felt small in that war. Even children had a job to do. It made them feel like soldiers in their own way. Every house had that sharp smell of bleach or ammonia on cleaning day. Women scrubbed floors by hand, windows open for air, yet no gloves, no masks. The sting in the eyes meant progress. Modern cleaners promise no fumes and gentle on skin. But those old floors shone from effort, not formulas. It was hard work and pride rolled together. the home spotless, the air biting. Before dryers hummed in every laundry room, fresh air did the job. Clotheslines stretched from back doors to fence posts, shirts flapping like flags. The smell, part soap, part sunshine, was a kind of magic. Neighbors talked across the yards while hanging towels. Today, we push a button and walk away. Back then, laundry was a rhythm of life, and it smelled like clean honesty. Tin foil was never thrown away. Families smoothed gum wrappers and cigarette liners, rolling them into tight silver balls for recycling drives. Kids proudly carried them to school, adding to the growing pile. Nothing was wasted. Even scraps had a purpose. Today, we toss aluminum by habit. Back then, every shiny bit meant something, a small contribution to the country's larger effort. Changing the oil at home meant letting it run right into the ground behind the garage. Nobody thought of contamination or pollution. The soil soaked it up, problem solved. The smell of oil and dust was part of every backyard. These days, we've got recycling centers and hazard labels. But in those days, common sense simply meant, if it's out of sight, it's handled. Hitchhiking was once just another way to get around. Teenagers stuck out a thumb on the roadside, heading to a dance or a ball game, and strangers happily stopped. It wasn't fear. It was friendliness. People trusted each other. A handwritten "to town" sign could get you there faster than any bus. Today, the thought feels reckless. Back then, it felt perfectly American. Mechanics and farmers worked bare-chested in summer heat, covered in dust and grease. Nobody wore masks or safety goggles, and asbestos brake pads filled the air with invisible clouds. It wasn't defiance, just ignorance. Men took pride in calloused hands and smudged faces. Today, OSHA would shut the place down. Back then, toughness was protection enough, or so they believed. A man could walk into a bank, shake hands with the manager, and walk out with a loan. No paperwork, no credit score, just trust. His word was his signature. Reputation mattered more than collateral. Nowadays, we're scanned, verified, and algorithm approved. Back then, a man's reliability was his currency, and the best credit rating you could have was your own good name. Office life looked polished. Secretaries typing in heels, pencils sharp, hair pinned. They brewed coffee, took dictation, and were often chosen for poise as much as skill. No HR policies, no talk of workplace equality. It was just how things were. Today, we'd call it unfair. Back then, it was part of the rhythm, the click of heels and typewriter keys marking another busy day. Hospitals had long wards lined with beds, privacy curtains pulled only at night. The smell of disinfectant and floor wax filled the air. Visitors came during strict hours, and nurses ruled the room with quiet authority. It was efficient, not comfortable. Today's private rooms and visitor passes would have seemed extravagant then. Healing was public, practical, and shared. A place where noise meant life. Early in the decade, you could still see the Iceman on his morning route. Leather apron, metal tongs, hauling big blocks from the truck. He'd chip a little extra for the kids if they asked nicely. By war's end, electric refrigerators had taken over, and the Iceman vanished. It's funny. One appliance quietly ended a whole profession, and most folks never noticed. Barbershops were where men caught up on everything that mattered: sports, politics, neighborhood gossip. The air was thick with tobacco and tonic. Talk was cheap and advice was free. Some even swapped ration coupons under the counter, though officially that was frowned upon. Today, haircuts are quick appointments. Back then, they were a ritual, 45 minutes of trimming, talking, and belonging. Doctors still made house calls, carrying black leather bags filled with glass thermometers and metal syringes. They might leave a vial of morphine or penicillin in your fridge with simple instructions. 1 drop, twice a day. No paperwork, no follow-up emails, just trust. Today's healthcare feels distant. Back then, medicine came with a handshake and the smell of liniment in the hall. Drugstores doubled as social hubs. Up front, the soda fountain hissed and clinked as teenagers shared sundaes. In the back, the pharmacist mixed real medicines by hand, measuring powders with brass scales. It was a place that bridged pleasure and necessity. Today, it's aisles of self-checkout and silence. Back then, the soda jerk knew your name, and the pharmacist knew your ailments. Teenagers packed dance halls and ballrooms to hear big bands play live. Smoke hung low, shoes scuffed hard wood, and the brass section blared over the laughter. It was electric, joy in a decade that needed it. Couples swung and twirled until curfew. Today, we'd film it on our phones. Back then, memories were made in the music itself, gone the moment the song ended. Those old gas pumps with glass globes on top looked like science experiments. You could see the fuel slosh inside before it poured into the tank. By the 40s, most had been replaced, but rural stations still used them. The glow at night was something magical. Today, we swipe cards under LED lights. Back then, even filling your tank felt like a small ceremony. Before fancy sterilizers, mothers boiled baby bottles right in the sink. Pots bubbled on the stove, steam fogging the windows. It was simple, effective, and a little risky. One slip, and you'd burn your fingers. Still, it worked. Today, we'd never trust that method. But somehow, those babies grew strong on milk warmed by love and just enough boiled water. Most homes had screened windows by then, but flies always found their way in. The sound of one buzzing lazily around a Sunday dinner table was practically part of the meal. Someone would swat it mid-sentence, and the conversation carried on. Nowadays, we'd seal the place up tight. Back then, open air meant life. A breeze, a smell of lilacs, and the hum of summer. Butcher shops in the 1940s were clean but simple. Meat laid neatly behind glass counters, wrapped in paper, with a nod and a string. No plastic, no labels, just trust. The butcher knew your cut, your family, maybe even your budget. Today, meat comes sealed and bar-coded. Back then, you got your dinner with a handshake and a smile, and that was enough. Factory whistles were the heartbeat of small-town life. They blew at dawn, noon, and quitting time, echoing across rooftops. Housewives set their clocks by them. Kids knew when to head home. It was a rhythm that tied everyone together. Today, we check phones for the hour. Back then, the whistle told you not just the time, but who you were working for. In boarding houses, men shared cramped rooms and communal sinks. Mornings were a shuffle of shaving brushes, razors, and conversation. Each man had his own blade, but mirrors were shared, fogged with steam and jokes about the day ahead. Privacy was scarce, but camaraderie was rich. Today, that'd feel like hardship. Back then, it just felt like company. The hum of ordinary men starting another day. New mothers rode home from the hospital with babies in their laps, windows down, wind in their hair. No car seats, no straps, no worry. Just joy and exhaustion wrapped in a blanket. Looking back, it seems reckless. But to them it was freedom. A ride home to start a new chapter. The safest place being a mother's arms, not a seatbelt. Behind most houses stood a rusty barrel or a shallow pit for burning trash. Smoke curled through the alleys on weekends, smelling of paper and orange peels. There were no garbage trucks yet, no recycling bins. It wasn't neglect, it was normal. The world was smaller then, and so were its rules. When the flames died down, life went quietly on. Farmers sprayed their fields by hand, the mist of DDT rolling over the crops like an early fog. It clung to clothes, settled on skin, and smelled faintly chemical, but clean. They called it progress. Science helping man feed the world. No masks, no gloves, no warnings. Today, we'd panic. Back then, it was the scent of a good harvest and modern farming. Silverware gleamed because housewives polished it the hard way, rubbing with ammonia pastes or gritty powders until their hands ached. No gloves, no safety talk, just effort and pride. The shine meant the job was done right. These days, we buy tarnish-proof metal. But back then, a mirror-finished table setting reflected more than light. It showed a home well cared for. Street sweepers used long hoses to flush gutters clean, sending runoff straight to creeks or rivers. Nobody thought twice about where it ended up. The water just went somewhere. Cities smelled of wet concrete and dust after the morning cleaning. Today, there'd be environmental boards and drainage plans. Back then, the goal was simple: make Main Street shine before noon. If a child skinned a knee, nobody fussed. Mom dabbed it with iodine, that fiery orange sting that made you swear it'd kill you before it healed you, then told you to run along. Bandages were optional, sympathy even rarer. Today, we sanitize and cushion every bruise. Back then, toughness was the cure, and a few scars were just part of growing up. Radio contests filled the airwaves, asking listeners to mail in empty cigarette packs or bottle caps for prizes. Families saved them in jars, hoping to win a toaster or a new radio. Even kids helped. Though they couldn't smoke, they scrounged for the packs. Today, it'd be banned advertising. Back then, it was harmless fun, and everyone loved hearing the winner announced live on air. A sore throat or cough meant reaching for syrup from the drugstore, often thick, sweet, and spiked with alcohol. Some even packed a dose strong enough to make you sleepy in minutes. Codeine needed a prescription, but plenty of remedies came close. People swore by them. Today, labels warn about addiction and drowsiness. Back then, medicine was whatever made you feel better fast. Public restrooms were divided cleanly, ladies and gentlemen only, with no in-betweens, no debates. The tiles were cold, the mirrors spotless, and etiquette was expected. Men tipped hats at the door. Women powdered noses at the sink. Simpler, yes, but narrower, too. The world stayed neatly labeled in black and white, just like the signs on those restroom doors. Payphones sat on nearly every corner, heavy metal booths with cords that stuck to your hand and smelled faintly of nickels. Nobody wiped them. Nobody worried. You dropped a coin, heard the satisfying clink, and talked fast before time ran out. These days, we'd cringe at the germs. But back then, a payphone was lifeline, and luxury rolled into one. Greyhound buses roared across two-lane highways, chrome sides gleaming with reflections of neon diners and gas stations. The tickets were paper, the seats stiff, and the view endless. Soldiers, students, drifters, all sharing the same road, the same cigarette haze. It was cheap, gritty, and romantic in its own way. America on the move, long before air travel made the country smaller. Stores kept tabs in little notebooks behind the counter. You bought what you needed, promised to pay on Friday, and that was that. No interest rates, no credit cards, just trust. The grocer knew who was good for it and who wasn't. Nowadays, we've got apps and debt scores. Back then, your word was your account balance, and a handshake was binding enough. City buses were packed and smoky, their metal seats baking hot in summer. Passengers cracked tiny windows for air, but the smoke always lingered. The bus rumbled, squeaked, and shuddered through town, yet it always got you there. No one complained. It was cheap and dependable. Today, the idea of lighting up on public transport seems absurd. Back then, it was just another morning ride. A boy could walk into a hardware store, slap down a few coins, and leave with a BB gun or a pocket knife. The clerk might offer advice, but no questions. Parents trusted kids to be careful, and most were. There were no warning labels, no parental waivers. Responsibility wasn't something you signed for. It was something you learned, one nicked finger at a time. Under every kitchen sink sat an arsenal of cleaners, bleach, ammonia, kerosene, all in plain bottles, none with child-proof caps. Kids were told not to touch, and that was that. There were no safety campaigns, no bright hazard stickers. It was a world that expected caution instead of mandating it. You learned quickly that curiosity and chemical burns didn't mix. Movie posters promised drama, romance, and stars, not cigarettes or whiskey. Those ads were saved for the lobby reels or the glossy magazines. You'd buy popcorn, watch a Camel commercial, and settle in for Casablanca. Nobody found it strange. The line between sales pitch and entertainment blurred easily then. Today, we'd call it manipulation. Back then, it was part of the show. Doctors smoked in their offices, sometimes right during the examination. A white coat, a stethoscope, and a cigarette dangling from the corner of the mouth was practically the uniform. Patients didn't mind. It made the doctor seem relaxed and wise. The smell of tobacco mingled with antiseptic and aftershave. It seems absurd now, but back then, Even medicine came with a puff of smoke. At school, milk came in glass bottles, warmed by the radiator before recess. It had that odd mix of creamy and metallic flavor, but no one complained. Kids lined up, drank fast, and clanked the bottles into wooden crates. No refrigeration, no cartons, just routine. Today, it'd never pass inspection. But for those classrooms, it was comfort in a world still rationing sweetness. Home economics for girls, woodworking for boys. That was the rule. Girls learned to hem, cook, and set a table. Boys built bird houses and learned how to measure twice, cut once. Nobody questioned it. Today, we'd call it outdated. But back then it felt like preparation. The world seemed clear, divided, and predictable, even if it was missing half the picture. Families piled into the back of pickup trucks after Sunday church, hair blowing in the wind, kids sitting on the tailgate. Nobody worried about seat belts or safety. They waved to neighbors, shared sandwiches, and drove the slow way home. It was freedom with a view. Today, it'd draw police lights in seconds. Back then, it was how Sunday afternoons were meant to feel. Wide open. When soldiers traveled cross-country by train, strangers offered them the best of everything. A seat, a meal, even a bed for the night. No one asked for thanks. It was just what people did. The war made everyone family. Today, we talk about supporting troops. Back then, folks did it without slogans, just a quiet generosity that filled the space between stations. Comic books passed from hand to hand until the covers curled. Superman, Captain Marvel, Wonder Woman, heroes printed in bright ink on thin paper. Kids traded them on porches and school steps, each swap sealed with a promise. They cost a dime, but they meant a lot more. Today, they're collector's items. Back then, they were simply magic, the kind you could fold in half. It wasn't unusual for a kid to walk to the corner store with $1 and a note that said, "Please sell 1 pack of Camels for Dad." The clerk would smile and oblige. Nobody doubted the story. Nobody thought it wrong. Today, it'd trigger alarms and reports. Back then, it was trust, plain and simple. A world where a child could still run errands for grown-ups. Kids played war in the alleys, wooden rifles, borrowed helmets, sometimes even real shell casings from training grounds. They didn't see danger, just adventure. The world was at war, and they mirrored it with imagination. Parents watched from porches, smiling proudly. Today, toy guns spark controversy. Back then, they were part of growing up, part of feeling brave in a world that needed heroes. Neighbors didn't ring and wait. They knocked once and stepped right in. If the door was open, that meant welcome. Coffee was poured before you even asked why they came. Privacy wasn't guarded. Community was. Today, we text before calling. Back then, you didn't need an invitation. Friendship was measured in footsteps, how far someone would walk just to say hello. In city boarding houses, tenants shared narrow halls and bathrooms with clawfoot tubs at the end. Travelers, widows, salesmen, all under one roof. You'd hear the pipes groan and footsteps overhead all night. It wasn't glamorous, but it was home. Rent was cheap, and loneliness was rarer. Today, we crave privacy. Back then, A hot meal and company were enough. Every evening the family gathered around the radio, the soft glow of the dial lighting their faces. News, music, comedy, and Roosevelt's voice filled the room. It was the heart of the home, a link to the wider world. There were no screens, no distractions, just voices that made the living room feel a little bigger. You didn't multitask, you just listened. Children played marbles in the gutter, chased streetcars, and drank from public spigots without a thought of germs. Their world was small, but it was theirs. Knees were scabbed, shoes were thin, and freedom was absolute. No one hovered, no one warned. Today's parents would panic, but those kids grew up sturdy, the kind who learned balance before they ever learned fear. Life in the 1940s moved slower, rougher, and simpler. A world with few warnings, little regulation, and plenty of trust. People fixed instead of replaced, believed instead of doubted, and leaned more on neighbors than systems. It wasn't safer, but it was steadier in its own way. Looking back, it feels both reckless and kind. A time when people lived closer to risk and to each other.